Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. World Bank slams Nigeria's electricity subsidy as wasteful, urges further reforms. The World Bank has described Nigeria's electricity subsidy costing over 200 billion naira monthly as regressive and warning that it may undermine the fiscal improvement gained from petrol subsidy and FX reforms. Presenting the May 2025 Nigeria Development Update, lead economist Alex Sienat praised the elimination of fuel and FX subsidies for driving economic growth, stabilizing the naira, and increasing foreign reserves. However, he stressed that sustaining these gains requires urgent action on electricity subsidy removal and better fiscal transparency. While acknowledging Nigeria's accelerated GDP growth and increased revenues, the World Bank urged faster implementation of social protection for the vulnerable and full remittance of subsidy savings by NNPC to the Federation. Joining us to discuss this is Gbolahan Olojede. He's a finance expert. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Good morning. Nice to be on the program.
Lovely to have you here. So the World Bank has called, this wasteful and regressive. First, do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think largely so. The way subsidy has been in Nigeria is that our capacity to administer it effectively has always been in doubt. So you even have a situation in which recently we found out that even the Federal Ministry of Power has not been paying its own electricity bills. So there are issues about administering subsidy in Nigeria. So it could be wasteful, like most of our subsidies are wasteful. But pulling subsidy out of electricity in a season where we have such a fragile economy is something where we need to think twice about. That is where I might disagree with the World Bank. The World Bank ought to realize the fragility of the Nigerian economy right now. We are barely, beginning to see some elements of recovery at the corporate levels from the energy cost impacted by fuel subsidy removal. So as that gradual recovery is creeping in, it seems as if the World Bank is saying it is time to unleash the next one. This is also happening in the midst of what might be oil prices uncertainty at the same time. So we have to be cautious. The World Bank should not be the one to dictate to us how we progress or how we proceed with our economic initiative. It is good to have their numbers, probably for country to country comparison and all the rest, but it must be Nigeria that would determine what it wants to measure, how it wants to determine the success of its economic policies, and go ahead to measure it by itself, not waiting for a World Bank. World Bank was not created because of Nigeria.
So with subsidy, right, I know that other countries, they kind of subsidize one thing or the other for their citizens. In America, agriculture, so when it comes to food and whatnot, is quite subsidized. Even in the UK, there is the education subsidy for students. So if you, as an international student, I had to pay even more, almost 300% for my own tuition fees compared to someone who was a home student. So there are ways that you can do some, certain things for your citizens. In Nigeria, what we had in the past was petrol subsidy, and now that has been taken out. Electricity subsidy, that is about to be taken out. So what can you say that the government is really doing for its people? Because if you're taking all of our taxes, right, you're taking all of these monies, we're not even seeing you develop the nation that like would expect it to be, then how would you say the government is helping us if they have to take subsidies from every single sector?
You see, some of the policy around subsidy, the problem in itself might not exactly have been about removing the subsidy, and I'm using the fuel subsidy as an example. One of the major problems with the removal of fuels, with the presence of fuel subsidy when it was there, was number one, how it had fueled very serious level of corruption in that subsidy space. So we had situation at some point in this country where people bring in PMS into Nigeria. They sell it off Cotonou. Then they go to Abuja to go and collect subsidy on fuel that never even entered the shores of Nigeria. That was how bad the subsidy regime for fuel in Nigeria was. But you see, in removing fuel subsidy from the economy, there are a few things that could have been done better. Number one is the timing of the removal. I think there are certain things that we need to transit rather than a dramatic removal. You know, that could be said to be a personal opinion, but I know I'm not alone in that school of thought. Number two is that we have to be able to plug the savings from that subsidy into something that will cushion the effect for the people. A very good example is investing some of these savings in fuel subsidy into public transportation system. So rather than remove it at one instance, then start looking for how we can transit from PMS to CNG, which is a lot more efficient. Maybe we should have had all that thinking, a broader approach to this matter, and then be able to plug some of those savings into a public transportation system. You mentioned about other countries, for example. Yeah. Some of those countries have transportation subsidy in a way, very sophisticated way, in which the government has plugged itself into that space by providing efficient public transport system. A very good example is in the UK, in London. A lot of people are out there on the road, getting on the train, including even members of the parliament. I still have a vivid image of the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom coming from leave in his village. And he was getting on the train to go back to London, to Downing. So that is how efficient public transport system has been. For us, there were no provision to cushion what was happening by the provision in the public transportation system segment. So people had to carry the full impact of that removal of fuel subsidy, which further got complicated by the unification of the multiple foreign exchange rates in Nigeria. So sometimes the approach to a policy issue may be the problem with how that policy will impact the people. And I just hope that there are lessons that we will take away from how the fuel subsidy removal has panned out, and that we will take that lesson if we're going to have to deal with other subsidy removal, so that we don't run into the same problem that we ran into with fuel subsidy removal. Energy cost is critical and is a major driver of inflation. So in pursuing the next issue around subsidy, we must have a better and more robust approach, looking at all the pros and cons, doing the scenario playing, and be prepared for whatever we desire to do in that space.
Okay, so the World Bank obviously has called this wasteful because it's 200 billion naira monthly. And in a way, that's a lot of money, to be honest. But what would be the implications if we do not take out this subsidy as swiftly as possible? And then what would be the gains if we take it out?
I've been around for a bit, and I've never really seen Nigeria enjoy electricity. So if I've never seen it for 50 years, so we can say for 50 years of subsidy, what have we got to show for that electricity? So is it a chicken and egg matter? Which one comes first? Do we need to put more electricity on the table and then demand for a better tariff regime? Or is it the tariff regime that needs to change first to drive the increase, the enhancement, or the transformation of our electricity space? Is the energy expert that will be able to speak better to that. But one thing is clear. We have not been able to attract the right level of investment in our electricity space. The private sector have not really brought in the level of money that they're supposed to bring into that space. I am very close to an institution, for example, that invested in the days of privatization of this disco, put in $1 million in one of the discos. Till today, not one naira shishi. He has not been able to bring out from that investment. So we must ask that question: will a properly structured tariff regime transform that space, bring more investment into that space, and we can begin to move away from this 5,000 megawatts electricity nonsense that has been on the table for probably before I was born, probably much less than anyway. So we have not progressed as a nation as far as electricity is concerned. We have not progressed. There is no nation in the world that can grow, no nation of 200 million people that can grow with 5,000 megawatts of electricity.
Right.
We must now take a comprehensive look at what we need to do to be able to deliver better electricity to drive the economy of this country. Otherwise, we will continue to talk from now till Jesus comes, and there will not be electricity and there will not be much progress as far as the economy of this country is concerned.
So, I hear you, and honestly, if we look at Nigeria, 5,000 megawatts for 200 million people doesn't cut it. I always like to use the case in point of South Africa, that they have just about 70 million people, and then they generate over 60,000 megawatts. So if you do the numbers, it doesn't make sense why Nigeria is still generating 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts, and that's what we're all sharing. And we do not even have, constant power. And for most people who their jobs, rely on this electricity, they cannot even do that. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend who has a workshop. He repairs cars and whatnot. Now, having to bake a car, maybe if you want to respray that car, having to bake that car will probably cost about 300,000 naira, and that's because they have to run diesel. So imagine the cost that goes on to the person who has to pay for it. So there's a whole lot that we're not even looking at when we come to the electricity sector and how it impacts, it affects businesses in this case. But if we take out the subsidy, which is great, especially if we're going to have more electricity to generate, and maybe the transmission company will be able to transmit more electricity for the discos, what's going to happen with the subsidy? Because my fear is the corruption that has eaten deeply into Nigeria. How are we sure that with this electricity subsidy there would be transparency for the people to know what they're doing or what these monies are being used for?
I like the mention of the word transparency.
Yeah.
And that is because it is at the heart of what we need to put on the table if we're going to deal with subsidy matters. How much is this subsidy? How is it arrived at?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're moving away from that subsidy, the gains from this subsidy, how will it work out? What will be the tariff for the various categories of consumers, and how is this being arrived at? I believe that if we put a little bit of transparency on the table and we share the vision with the people, it might be easier to get their buy-in and support to make that happen. And then also that people might be willing to pursue the promises and ensure that we arrive at that vision. We have not seen much of transparency in Nigeria.
Yeah.
I'm not excited about the level of transparency that came even with the fuel space that we discussed as part of this discussion.
Yeah.
As we speak today, we still have not been able to determine exactly how much fuel we consume in this country. We still have not been able to say with certainty whether Port Harcourt refinery is indeed churning out what we were told it was churning out. I knew at some point people were lifting from Port Harcourt refinery. Is it still like that? We were told that Warri also started producing. Sometimes last week I read that the Warri refinery refurbishment has failed. That was close to $1 billion US in the drains. So we've heard Mr. Dangote saying, oh, I can produce more than enough for the consumption of Nigeria. We've had an MPC on the other side said, no, we must import to be able to increase the pool of fuel that is available in that space. Honestly, there is still not enough transparency. I'm just hoping that maybe with the new board, great credentials, that the system will not consume them, will not swallow them, and they will be able to bring on more transparency into that space. It is the same level, it is the same problem that is going to pursue us into the electricity subsidy space if we're not careful. We are always scared of transparency in this country. That is the reality. If we put more transparency on the table, for example, I'm a band A, so I pay 200 and something, and I still don't know whether 200 and something is what I should pay. Should it have been 250 instead of 220, or should it have been 150? How was it arrived at? So somebody wakes up again and say, oh, I'm going to jack it up to 270. What exactly happened? How do I know the basis for that jacking up to 270? I don't. If most of, I'm just giving an arbitrary example. If most of our electricity generation is gas powered, and the price of gas is falling in the market, will I get a benefit for it? Will my tariff go down? I don't know. So we need to let people know. We should stop being scared of transparency. It helps a great deal, both in policy formulation and in getting the buy-in of people to support policy direction. But as long as people don't know, everything is shrouded in secrecy and opaqueness, we're going to continue to have issues.
I like the fact that he said shrouded in secrecy, because that seems to be the order of the day. Everybody is, hush-hush about these things. For the NNPCL, we do not know how much crude we produce every day. We don't know what it's being sold for. So you see that translate into different sectors. But for you now, what are some policy steps that you think Nigeria must take, the government needs to take, if we want to see the economic stability with this? Because if the World Bank is saying that this is wasteful, then that means there is a lot more that we can do with the money. So how can we ensure that there's sustainability with this money if the subsidy is being taken out, and just to make sure that people can get power, because that's what we need. It's almost like the bloodline of the nation.
You see, I'm almost compelled to start looking in the direction of certain conspiracy theories when it comes to power. When the military was here, we had no power. When Fourth Republic came, we were all delighted. OBJ was very passionate about the issues of power. It was as passionate as to declare a state of emergency in power. A lot of billions of dollars of naira were committed to that project. By 2007, when OBJ left, there was still no power. Mr. Yar'Adua came in. Mr. Yar'Adua had what he called the 7-point agenda.
Yes.
One of those 7-point agenda was electricity. Mr. Yar'Adua, passed on, there was still no electricity. GEJ came into that position. GEJ was the one that took the step to, privatize some segments of the electricity space. All those discos that we have today and the rest of it, why by Mr. Jonathan. So he also identified the problem that we needed power, and he wanted to solve that problem. By the time Mr. GEJ left that position, there was still no power. PMB came in the saddle. He identified the fact that, there is a problem, there's a disconnect between generation, transmission, and distribution. So one of the first problems I wanted to solve was to optimize the electricity chain, ensure that if we're able to produce 10,000 megawatts, at least let's be able to ensure that we can get maybe 9,005 of each to the people. So we had this Siemens contract, fantastic idea. By 2023, when PMB left, there was still no electricity in Nigeria. And now the government has come in the saddle. It has also identified that there is electricity problem. Without electricity, we are not going anywhere. You cannot build an economy on 5,000 megawatts. It is absolutely impossible. Maybe that should be something for a state or for a city, for a Kenya or something. If we are really going to run, drive industrialization in this country. So the question is, are we now at a junction where we want to solve this problem? Is the current government committed to see that through? What is the vision? Is he willing to share it with us? If he shares the vision and he puts a little bit of transparency on the table, and I don't want to ignore the possibility of my conspiracy theory anyway, that there might be some external forces also who have determined that if Nigeria should get it right with electricity, something will dramatically change, and they will do all they can to ensure that Nigeria will not get it right with electricity. Is the government willing to look in that direction and break whatever force that is? We cannot be solving the same problem for 50 years and it is not going anywhere.
It's ridiculous.
So let government do its bit, create the right environment for private sector to thrive, bring genuine private sector institution into that space, understand what the needs will be, what reforms will be required to attract them, drive those reforms, and hold the private sector to account via the regulatory agency to ensure that we can deliver the electricity that we desire. It is a shame that the electricity that may not be enough even for Lagos is what the entire Nigeria is currently relying upon. Without electricity, we will not be able to turn the turbines of the economy of this country, as it were.
That's such a good way to end this, but I just want to get your take on a particular topic, right into this. You know that there are 3 tiers, if I can call it. There's the GenCos, transmission, and then the DISCOs. And of course, GenCos, they're the ones who generate this electricity. They can generate as much as possible. And if the transmission is not able to transmit that to the DISCOs, then it's wasteful. So what do you think about the fact that GenCos and DISCOs are already privatized, but transmission is still with the government? If we want to see a change, right, what do we do? Do we ensure that even with the transmission, there is maybe some public-private partnership to ensure that everybody can, can have this electricity? It flows through the 3 tiers.
The most inefficient part of that chain is the transmission grid. There's no doubt about that. So privatization of GenCo, privatization of DISCO. Of course, there is still a lot of issues with DISCOs as well. But the most inefficient is transmission. And we need to do something about transmission. Is it privatization? Is it a PPP arrangement? Whatever we need to do. Don't forget, when I spoke about PMB's idea with electricity, it was to optimize that chain. We undoubtedly produce much more, or we have an installed capacity that is much more. I think our installed capacity should be in the range of about 14,000 megawatts of electricity. But at the end of the day, how much of that 14,000 is actually generated? And from what is generated, how much end up at the distribution end? How much can the grid itself carry? So we must look at the entire chain. All this thinking in silos, part of the problem we had was that when we were thinking of improving electricity, it seems as if we were focused on how much we could generate. And we're not even looking at, even if we now generate this much, how are you going to take that thing you have generated to the people that will use it, which is the transmission grid? So now our thinking must be across the entire chain. We must go back to that Mr. Buhari's idea of first optimizing that chain, ensuring that we can get a significant amount of what is generated to come across to the users at the distribution end. And then all the reforms, including the multi-year tariff order and all that we need to do to get all the investment that are necessary to transform that space, let's do it. If we don't, we'll still be talking about this by the time the next administration comes. Maybe by then it will have become 5,050.
That's so funny. Well, we hope that, they're putting in the work, especially with the value chain, putting in the work to ensure that, transmission can be able to transmit as much to the DISCOs. And honestly, everything that we're just speaking right now is English. What the person on the street wants is they want to see power. So we need to be able to have enough, to power our nation. And like you said, 5,000 megawatts cannot do it. It cannot grow the economy. So we need to think bigger. If removal of the electricity subsidy would do that, and we are sure that we'll definitely get constant power in Nigeria, then maybe this is the time to just take the bull by the horn and do what is needed. But hopefully, we hope that, whatever the World Bank advice is, we look at it holistically, look at the nuances, the intricacies as Nigerians, and work with that. Anyways, we want to say thank you so much for coming, Gbolahan. It's always a pleasure having you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a wonderful day, sir. Yeah. All right, so we're speaking with Gbolahan Olojede. He's a finance expert, and we've just been looking at the fact that the World Bank has slammed Nigeria's electricity subsidy as wasteful and has urged further reforms. We'll go on a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing the fact that Wike opposes zoning PDP presidential tickets to the north in 2027. Please stay with us.